What should I do for my drama project? Could show some baby pictures. Yeah, that's it. I'll show baby pictures with music.
Lollipop, lollipop, oh lolly, 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 lollipop, lollipop, oh lolly, 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 lollipop, lollipop, oh lolly, 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 lollipop. Boom, boom, boom. Lollipop, lollipop, oh lolly, 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 lollipop, lollipop, oh lolly, 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 lollipop.
Nah, I'll just make my own kung fu movie.
Try the powerful snake bite.
Show the class the tape of me competing in the National Bowling Championships in Peoria, Illinois. Welcome, sports fans, to Peoria, Illinois, where world-famous Bill Lakeman will compete for his 5th straight national title. We seem to be having some technical difficulties with our video signal today, so please be patient and we'll do our best to clear it up. Bill Lakeman is about to take his first bowl for today, and oh, it's a strike! He could be on his way to his 10th straight 300 game. Here he comes with his second approach. And what do you know, folks? It's another strike. His third? Oh, and get... that gets too repetitive. I could always film myself in a Hollywood-style car chase. Yeah.
Moment that we have left, we want to talk right down to that in a language that everybody here can easily understand.
Look in my eyes, what do you see? The cult of personality. I know your anger, I know your dreams. I've been everything you wanna be. Oh, I'm the cult of personality. Like Joseph Stalin and Gandhi. Oh, I'm the cult of personality. The cult of personality. The cult of personality. Neon lights of Nobel Prize. When a mirror speaks, the reflection lies. You won't have to follow me. Only you can set me free.
Maybe I'll just film myself jumping on the trampoline.
You don't have to say a word, and it comes in every language. You can see it in every nation.
I can't think of anything to do. Well, I'll just put it off and do it tomorrow.
Good night, sweetheart. Well, it's time to go home. Good night, sweetheart. Well, it's time to go home. I hate to
shaped our century.
and changed the lives of millions.
But how did it all happen?
Who were the players?
And what did we learn in the end?
Watch history unfold.
When Discovery presents Great Days of the Century, beginning Monday at 7 Eastern, only on the Discovery Channel.
Boat building is like house building, only rounder and upside down.
It's like a grand puzzle that you put together.
Visit a remarkable boat-building community in Maine. Craftsmen carrying on a proud tradition, transforming the grace and power of a tree into vessels of beauty. Tales of Wood and Water, the world premiere of an original Discovery production, Monday, March 2nd at 9 Eastern, only on the Discovery Channel. 1 year after the Gulf War ceasefire, the Discovery Channel is proud to present the following special presentation.
It was quite clear that we were reaching a moment of climax as a result of the Iraqi buildup.
What was brought home by Saddam Hussein's invasion of Kuwait was that he did not have to take Saudi Arabia in order to dominate the Gulf.
We wanted to make certain that that the Iraqis knew eyeball to eyeball from us that we were serious. We were deadly serious.
The president's message was very clear, and that's if asked to defend Saudi Arabia, we would.
August 1990, the Iraqi forces of Saddam Hussein invade Kuwait. By January, America enters a war in the Middle East. 1 year later, the key players in Operation Desert Storm are gathered for the first time, brought together by former Assistant Secretary of Defense Richard Pearl. Now resident fellow for the American Enterprise Institute in Washington, D.C., Pearl conducted exclusive interviews with the Gulf War's top command and organized the Institute's panel discussions of the conflict and its aftermath. Policymakers and military leaders offer a day-by-day account. The futile negotiations, the tense preparations for combat, and the battles in the air and on the ground. The Gulf Crisis, the road to war. On our second episode, a battle of words and images. The negotiations continue, but Allied forces led by America prepare for combat.
What stunned me is that when this second increment of 250,000 troops started to move toward Saudi Arabia, Hussein still did not understand, as any junior military officer in the United States would have understood, that he was going to lose.
On this episode, our American Enterprise Institute panel is led by Richard Pearl.
Once we decided how many forces it would take, General Schwarzkopf said how many forces it would take to do the job. The president said, let's do it.
3 weeks after Iraq invaded Kuwait, President Bush was still giving the appearance of enjoying his usual summer vacation in Maine. But on August 22nd, he summoned his war cabinet for a crisis meeting.
When the president has gone to Kennebunkport in the summers, General Scowcroft and I have split the time up there, and this meeting took place during the time I was up there with my children. And I wasn't seeing much of them because of all the preparations for the war. Everyone else flew up from Washington, Scowcroft, Powell, Cheney.
Frequently, and especially in the summertime, end up in the middle of a crisis meeting at Kennebunkport for one reason or another. It's a beautiful setting, of course, out on Walker's Point, jutting out into the Atlantic.
The decision the president was faced with that afternoon was, do we act now to show our determination that we are going to use force to intercept Iraqi shipping, or do we take a little bit more time?
The crisis had actually started 4 days earlier. An American frigate fired warning shots at an Iraqi tanker, which refused to stop in the Gulf. Iraq had earlier called the blockade an act of war and said there would be grave consequences if more shots were fired.
We had, it seemed like, 2 or 3 deputies meetings a day, and we were tracking Iraqi ships heading for Aden, and there was a lot of debate about what the significance would be if it got to Aden.
This was a specific test being thrown down by Saddam Hussein. This did not just seem to be ships coming in through the normal course. I think the numbers of ships and the fact, if I recall, that some were heading toward Iraq, others are going from Iraq to Yemen, seemed to us, again, to be a bit of testing on his part to see if these international sanctions, which again were a rather new art form, would in fact be enforced.
There was a real concern, I think, that all of us felt that if we went on too long with us warning the Iraqis, telling them to stop and saying there was a blockade and not doing anything to enforce it, that at the very least Saddam Hussein was going to misinterpret us as weak and possibly other people.
All the leaders in the region asked, is the U.S. serious? Is it going to stay the course?
The legitimate government of Kuwait would like to see these sanctions enforced, as indeed would most of the rest of the world, so that this aggression can be reversed and further aggression can be deterred.
As James Baker flew to Wyoming for his vacation, the Gulf strategy hung on one question.
The question was whether or not we should proceed under Article 51, which we were all asserting we had a full legal right to do, or whether, in order to keep the coalition together, we should take a little bit longer and try and get yet another resolution from the Security Council authorizing use of force to enforce the embargo.
There was always the tension between when you used the United Nations and when you went to the United Nations and when you didn't. We could have done it alone, we could have done it with what we had, but you had to think of this not just as a narrow exercise, but as trying to keep together this large coalition for purposes down the road that might even be more ambitious.
I think it was particularly important to get the Soviets on board. Again, we were getting very close to use of force.
The Americans needed Soviet support to pass a resolution through the United Nations. But in Moscow, the Soviets had just opened negotiations with the Iraqis.
The Iraqi Deputy Prime Minister went to Moscow, and they clearly were seeing if they could separate the Soviets from us. At least that was our interpretation of what was going on. Shevardnadze, in talking to Secretary Baker on August 20th, said, we think we have a chance to get the Iraqis to pull out, to live up to the terms of 660 and to withdraw unconditionally. But we need a little bit of time to do that.
I was talking 2 and 3 times a day from my cabin in Wyoming to Shevardnadze in Moscow and to the president back in Maine. Shevardnadze was asking us to, I think he asked us to give him 5 days. We felt that that was a little bit too long.
The secretary was saying at the same time to him, there is not a lot of time. We have this early test. It's important for us to stay together. It's important to do this on the basis of Security Council resolutions if we can, but not at the price of allowing them to either break the coalition or allowing them to think that, in fact, they can separate us.
We ultimately agreed that we could maybe wait 3 days or the ships would get too far down to the point that we would not be able to do anything about it.
2 of the 3 days passed. The War Cabinet assembled at Kennebunkport. The president needed to decide if and how he would stop the defiant Iraqi ships.
So the question was, do we do it now to make sure there's no mistaken belief on Saddam's part that he can get away with this, or do we wait a few days in order to have a far more cohesive coalition package to do it with full benefit of Soviet support, UN support, and whatnot?
It was a fairly hotly debated issue. Some argued that that we couldn't afford to let these ships get away after issuing the strong statements that we had issued, that we would look like a paper tiger. It was a bad way to get the military part of this off the ground in a way by seeming to back down at the very outset and let these tankers slip through.
Would we intervene unilaterally, or would we go to the UN, not knowing at that point whether we would get authority? And we were divided on the issue, and I wanted to move, and Secretary Baker didn't.
The president was being pushed by some others to move a little bit more quickly, and I was counseling him to at least give us a chance to see if we couldn't bring the Soviets along
While James Baker was on vacation, his deputy, Lawrence Eagleburger, represented the State Department.
I was, as is usually the case, on both sides of the issue. Until I got a call from Secretary Baker, at which point I became a firm advocate of waiting a little longer.
I'm interested in how your boss changes your mind.
It's very easy.
There were a number of phone calls. Most of them were between me and Charles Powell, who was Mrs. Thatcher's national security advisor. And she was urging action.
One of the main problems we faced in British politics at that time was the desire, the determination of quite a number of people in Parliament and in the media to say, will you, the government, promise that you will never, ever use force in any circumstances without a specific authorizing resolution of the United Nations? And Mrs. Thatcher, very rightly, was not prepared to be tied down like that.
Finally, the President and Mrs. Thatcher talked on the issue, and he finally convinced her that it was best to go to the UN.
Yes, I think she was getting quite agitated, and she used one of her famous, extremely diplomatic phrases, for which she's absolutely renowned.
She says, "All right, George, all right, but this is no time to go wobbly." And we used that phrase almost daily after that.
Now the question is, how much more UN action benefits this idea of the world staying more closely together? And I might be prepared to give a little time, speaking just for the U.S. We're only one country there, important one though it may be.
The President came down very strongly on the side of waiting for the UN resolution. But I want to convey it was a very tough call.
While we were deliberating, did that ship get through that was being shadowed by the Reed?
It did get through, didn't it?
It did, and ultimately we let one get taken.
But I think it's also important, at least my impression, the President showed more than a little frustration at that Kennebunkport meeting about all of this process. He decided we should wait, but there is no doubt in my mind that if we had not, at some reasonable time, gotten the UN support, he would have gone ahead and acted unilaterally.
The next day, the President and I went fishing. The President loves to fish, and this particular summer was not a great bluefish summer. We were out there for about 4 hours, and the bluefish really were not biting, and we started to talk in a way that we really don't have the opportunity to do in almost any other circumstances. You're out there on a boat in the ocean, there's absolutely nothing to do. And so we started talking about the end of the Cold War and the possibility that now that the Soviets, for the first time, really had joined us in a third world, if you will, crisis situation, whereas before each third world crisis automatically became a test of wills between the United States and the Soviet Union. And did this open up the possibilities for what came to be called a New World Order?
At the end of the third day, Shevardnadze called me back and he said, well, we've made our run at the Iraqis. We're not going to be able to get anything done, so we'll go with you on that resolution. And they voted with us.
When we return to the Gulf crisis, the road to war, Saddam Hussein shocks the world with a hostage situation.
Learn about the invention that washed away a dirty job forever. It's the washing machine on The Secret Life of Machines. Tuesday at 9:30 Eastern, only on the Discovery Channel.
When the reviews started coming in,
Chevy Blazer got four-wheeler of the year.
they sent a signal about change,
Here's one on Pontiac. This is what I like here. Import fighter.
about determination and lasting quality.
Looks like old 88 did it
It's a
again.
change you can see here
The new breed of American sedan.
and on the faces of the people of General Motors. GM, putting quality on the road.
I'm alive, Jeff Hashimoto.
I'm alive, Rhonda Williamson.
I'm alive, Sonia Schofield.
I'm alive, Howard Weber.
Want to get more out of life?
I'm alive, Jessica Weber.
Get airbags.
See your Allstate agent for a list of cars with airbags.
We're alive.
Why should you change phone companies when you're perfectly happy with the one you've got? Sprint spokesperson. Volume discounts. So if you call a lot, it would be nuts to use anyone else. You have relatives in over 180 countries. Sprint lets you call them all direct. Phone cards, even in Braille. Sprint didn't go down and leave a kabillion people stranded. Smart and friendly operators, even at 3 a.m. How many more reasons do you need?
If you like 'em fresh, you'll love 'em Fisher.
You can see how fresh Fisher mixed nuts look. Compare Fisher mixed nuts to the leading brand. You can see the difference. Look inside Fisher hazelnuts. They look light and clean. Fisher pecans look big and plump. But looks are one thing. How do they taste? Rich and crunchy. They even smell Fisher fresh.
If you like 'em fresh, you'll love 'em Fisher.
Their words and their pictures show how ordinary men turned the tide of World War II. GI Diary, Thursdays at 8:30 Eastern, only on the Discovery Channel.
American Express now gives you an easy way to apply for membership. All you have to do is call.
Can I apply for the card over the phone?
Yes, you can. All I'll need is some information.
Great.
For those who qualify, the card comes with a world of privileges. Privileges that give you an extra measure of financial flexibility.
Do you like it?
I love it.
Then we'll take it.
Privileges that extend the free repair period offered under most manufacturers' warranties. Privileges that include help when you need it.
American Express, I lost my wallet, my cash, and all my cards.
We can have another card for you by tomorrow. American Express?
To apply, simply call 1-800-THE-CARD. We'll take your application over the phone and start processing it right away.
That was so easy. Thank you. And thank you for calling American Express. On the card, sir?
No need to wrap it.
Membership has its privileges, so call 1-800-THE-CARD now.
We now continue with episode 2 of the Gulf Crisis, The Road to War. The UN resolution brought Iraq's trade to a halt. But the president still faced a problem that drove one of his predecessors out of the White House.
Mr. President, what about the hostages?
I just don't like taking questions on serious matters on my vacation. So, you know, it's just not a good thing to keep doing it like this.
Was this the ghost of Jimmy Carter's handling of the hostages in Iran stalking the White House?
It wasn't just that. I mean, we had all seen what can happen when an administration talks too much about it, and you can become hostage to a hostage crisis. And we were hoping that just maybe these people could get out if we didn't make it a major object of our diplomacy ourselves. We specifically avoided talking about it. The so-called H word never got mentioned for several weeks.
In the first days of the war, Westerners living in Iraq and Kuwait were corralled into hotels by Saddam Hussein. On August 17th, these guests were deployed at key military installations. Hussein proclaimed them as his human shields.
We clearly, by that point, had a hostage problem, and we felt that the only choice at that point was to come clean, and at the last minute, I remember the president inserted it. I think it was the speech, the Veterans and Foreign War speech.
We've been reluctant to use the term hostage, but when Saddam Hussein specifically offers to trade the freedom of those citizens of many nations he holds against their will in return for concessions, there can be little doubt that whatever these innocent people are called, they are in fact hostages. And I want there to be no misunderstanding. I will hold the government of Iraq responsible for the safety and well-being of American citizens held against their will.
Saddam Hussein promptly responded to President Bush, publicly displaying the safety and well-being of those he called his guests.
Stuart will, I'm sure, be happy to have, as part of his life or his history, personal history, that he played a role in maintaining peace.
As this was
coming on television, I was sitting with an Arab ambassador who said what we really ought to do is we ought to engage in a bit of public diplomacy and make the point that Saddam Hussein likes to call himself an Arab knight, but true Arab knights don't hide behind the skirts of women and children. And about the same time, Sir Charles, Mrs. Thatcher went down on the floor of the House of Commons and said roughly the same thing.
It is strange for someone who claims to be the leader of the Arab world, a latter-day Saladin, to hide behind women and children.
Within a matter of days, Saddam came out and announced that women and children would be permitted to leave. And that was positive reinforcement that you could get under their skin and provoke the sort of results that you wanted.
You know, a few days later, there was another signal to Saddam, an extraordinary one, an unprecedented one, and that was the President of the United States addressing the people of Iraq over Iraqi national television.
Yeah, this was one of my greater diplomatic successes, as a matter of fact. What we wanted to do was to try to get the Iraqis to agree to play a tape of the president speaking to the people of Iraq. So a tape was made, and then the issue became, how do we present this? How do we deliver this to the Iraqis? So we choreographed this very nice scheme where the ambassador would come in, we would have the television there to take pictures of him sitting down and my sitting there across from him. So I said, oh, well, here we go. So I proceeded to try to hand him the tape, and he refused to take it.
Your charge of affair in Baghdad. Or the first time I've heard that. Yes.
And I, with the wit that is always the case when you're pressed like this, allowed us out of the press that I had expected it to work this way. And what I really wanted was to show the American people how nasty he was, because he was a sleazy little fellow.
In the end, did you manage, Secretary Kelly, to get the tape there? And
somebody flew to Amman, Jordan with the tape and went in overland and gave it to Joe, and you ought to pick up the story from there.
So I got it and went over to the Foreign Ministry and gave it to the Foreign Ministry Undersecretary.
This is the message from President Bush to the Iraqi people, which I'm on my way to deliver, and I have a meeting in about 10 minutes at the Foreign Ministry on this.
There's also a serious side even before all this, which is when we initially...
I thought the whole thing was serious.
Be that as it may. There's been a lot of talk about how we potentially would lose the so-called Arab street, the man and woman in the Arab world. How in Iraq, we just had a pretty good hunch that the truth wasn't getting through. And it was our hope, and quite honestly, we were pleasantly surprised that we got this 8-minute or whatever opportunity to get the word out. Joe will probably remember when it was finally broadcast in Baghdad. I think rallies and so forth were called at that very minute, coincidentally, of course. And I expect the Iraqi Nielsen ratings were somewhat modest for the showing.
President Bush invited the Emir of Kuwait to Washington. The Emir came as his honored guest. This is the man the U.S. would go to war for, to liberate his country.
He is a taciturn man, not given to emotion or long speeches and so on, but he was describing the plight of his people, the kinds of things that were happening inside Kuwait, the desperation that he felt for his people.
The president had already made up his mind on what he was going to do before that meeting. It reconfirmed the determination that the president had. It reconfirmed all the suspicion of the atrocities and torture and the violence that was being perpetrated by the Iraqi forces. It reconfirmed that Saddam Hussein and his people were evil thugs.
When we return to the Gulf crisis, the road to war, the number of U.S. troops doubles as sanctions are imposed on Saddam Hussein.
Brought to you in part by Buick, the new symbol for quality in America.
It's not that we're out to burst any balloons here, but the 1992 Buick Skylark comes with something as standard equipment that's optional on practically every import in Skylark's class. Anti-lock brakes. When you add up the cost of the car, that could save you almost $1,000. That could, of course, also help save you your life.
Day is done and you're working up an appetite. I wonder what minute.
Hey, hon, what's for dinner?
It's cooking up for dinner tonight.
Tonight, in just 10 minutes, you can enjoy the whole grain, nutty taste of Minute Instant Brown Rice. It's a healthy, all-natural brand source and makes a hearty meal worth coming home to.
Just look what minute is cooking up for dinner tonight.
Recently, I switched pain relievers from Tylenol to Advil. You see, I got these really pounding headaches, and I found 2 Advil worked better than 2 Tylenol gel caps. For my tough headaches, Advil just works better. Advil, advanced medicine for pain.
Now there's another way to plug into freshness. New Glade plug-in shell.
Plug it in, plug it in.
A new shell design and 2 new fresh scents.
Plug it in, plug it in.
It gently warms this refill cartridge for 30 days of freshness.
Freshen up the air. Freshen everywhere. Plug it in, plug it in.
Glade plug-ins and new Glade plug-in shell.
Plug it in.
From SC Johnson Wax.
Sure. Unsure. Sure. Unsure. Sure. Unsure. When dryness really counts, be sure to be dry. Sure Solid has the most effective wetness-fighting ingredient you can buy. For dryness no one can beat. So you're either sure or unsure. Sure. Unsure. Be sure to be dry.
White power!
This week on Discovery Sunday.
White people started this country. White people should run this country.
They preach white power and racial supremacy inside neo-Nazi organizations in the United States on Blood in the Face. Then, preserving the best of the past as part of the planning for the future. A look at the growing historic preservation movement on Patterns of Change. This week beginning at 9 Eastern on Discovery Sunday. The days when the world stood still.
The moments etched in time forever.
The events that shaped our century.
And changed the lives of millions.
But how did it all happen?
Who were the players?
And what did we learn in the end?
Watch history unfold.
When Discovery presents Great Days of the Century, beginning Monday at 7 Eastern, only on the Discovery Channel.
We now continue with episode 2 of The Gulf Crisis, The Road to War.
No one knew when the sanctions were first imposed how Saddam Hussein himself would react to them. I think there was a chance that seeing this kind of coalition built up against him, seeing himself deprived of all the financial benefit he hoped to get from taking Kuwait, and even deprived of the oil revenues he used to enjoy before, he might have made a decision, this isn't worth it, I'm pulling out.
We were all hoping that this gentleman would come to his senses at some point. But as you went into October, and we discussed all this, started to lose hope. We were dealing with a man who was not responding to the logic of the situation, and it clearly indicated he was prepared to risk the lives of many tens of thousands of Iraqi soldiers to see what lay at the end of this little passion play.
The Secretary and General Powell were asked to start looking at what a plan might be like if we had to use military force to get him out.
I was then asked, how would you eject the Iraqis from Kuwait if you had to do it? And I immediately went back and said, I don't have the necessary forces in place to do that. And they said, yeah, but if you had to do it, right now, with the forces you have, what would you do? So we put together a plan which, based upon the forces that were available at that time, would be the plan that we would have to use.
It's around October 10th that General Johnston, Schwarzkopf's chief of staff, came back to Washington and briefed that plan.
But when that plan was briefed, That plan was briefed, immediately followed by a statement which said that is not what the Commander-in-Chief of Central Command is recommending. It is a weak plan and it is not the plan we choose to execute. And here are all the things that are wrong with it, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, and J, and a lot more. And if, in fact, we are serious about, in fact, ejecting them from Kuwait, what we need is more forces to be able to execute a proper campaign.
We would have been in a position where all we could do is a straight up the center assault into Kuwait itself. And
which would be terribly costly.
It would have been very costly. That's where he had all of his heavy formations. That's where he dug in significantly. It was the worst possible kind of strategy to pursue from a military standpoint. Very costly in terms of casualties. We did not want to do that.
I remember feeling this looks a bit like the charge of the Light Brigade. If everything worked exactly perfectly according to plan and we were at the right place and the Egyptians were at the right place at exactly the right time, it could work. But not only was there all of that had to work right, if anything went wrong, there was nothing left to defend Saudi Arabia. There were no reserves to throw into the breach. It was quite obvious and sort of dramatically obvious that if you were going to conduct an offensive option responsibly, you had to have more force there.
Yes, sir. And what you're doing is very important because it sends a message that this is a new era. It is a new world. The United States and the Soviet Union are cooperating. The UN is working again, but there are still bad people in the world. Mr. Hussein, Saddam Hussein, is a bad person.
I went out to Saudi Arabia in, I guess, the third week of October thereabouts to talk to Norm Schwarzkopf, get a sense of how the planning was coming. We had spirited discussions, as only military professionals can have when they're dealing with a problem of this nature. And we all were in agreement as to the nature of the additional force that would be required.
And I said, if the enemy changes, then we may have to change this plan. But right now, this is the way I see it happening. He never changed.
And I then flew back to Washington to advise the Secretary of Defense and the President of what additional forces would be required.
I remember being in the room with Secretary Cheney and General Powell when they were reviewing some of the first plans about how we would use the larger force and what became eventually the westward sweep through Iraq.
That would keep his forces pinned and focused upon what was happening from the south into Saudi Arabia, and then execute a flanking attack around to the west to cut off his forces from behind.
And I remember General Powell took his flashlight pointer and pointed it straight at the heart of Kuwait, and he said, while all of this is going on, we have to keep Saddam Hussein's attention right there.
The point I made was there is an army in Kuwait that has to be ejected. And everything we do has to gear itself to that purpose and not fritter resources or assets away from that purpose. And whenever I would brief the deputies or with the principals or even in the Oval, I would use this laser pointer, which showed a little red laser beam on the map. And after a while, it got, some people liked it and some people started to get hypnotized by it. But I always used it. The President liked it, so that's why.
General Powell briefed us on that plan. We, in effect, presented it to the President and said, here's what we would like to do.
We decided the thing to do was to bring in a heavy corps from Germany, the 7th Corps, equipped with the most modern armored fighting vehicles we have and fighting systems that we have, and simply go around them. And for good measure, we threw in the great Big Red 1 Division from Fort Riley, Kansas, to make sure the 7th Corps was a full 3-division corps. And several more aircraft carriers to make sure that Norm would never want for airplanes. If we had stayed at the Defense Force and not added, it probably would have capped out at about 250,000 by early December, and that would have ended it. This was going to double it. And the President listened carefully. Questions were asked, but he never hesitated.
I have today directed the Secretary of Defense to increase the size of U.S. forces committed to Desert Shield to ensure that the coalition has an adequate offensive military option should that be necessary to achieve our common goals.
And so the President decided to keep on deploying. But since we viewed it as a continuum, we did not probably sufficiently consult with the Congress and make them aware of what we were doing and the rationale for it. So it was a surprise and an unpleasant one for the Congress.
Well, it was a call from Secretary Cheney in the morning of the 8th. Not very elaborate, just an announcement the administration was doubling the forces. This, of course, had never been discussed with the congressional leadership group that had been visiting the White House in previous weeks.
I did have the responsibility of calling several members of Congress to notify them of the president's decision. Many of them were supportive and agreed with it. Some didn't. Sam was concerned about it.
In my opinion, before we embark on an offensive action, that we should have a congressional debate, and I think we ought to have the country behind the men and women who are there before we go into a war.
The president headed to the Middle East to drum up morale. Back home, his support for the Persian Gulf policy eroded. A CNN Time poll showed that although 53% of Americans approved of the way President Bush handled the crisis, his support since August had dropped 30%.
The administration's position, as I recall it, was that they were willing to have a vote if all else failed, as long as it was a sort of not accompanied by a divisive debate, and if the outcome was more or less certain to be supportive of the administration. We couldn't guarantee the outcome.
The Congress held hearings, questioning whether the administration was abandoning sanctions too soon.
If, in fact, the sanctions will work in 12 to 18 months instead of 6 months, the trade-off of avoiding war with its attendant sacrifices and uncertainties would, in my estimation, be more than worth it.
If the president were to ask me today, can you guarantee that these sanctions will work within a year or two, the answer is no, I cannot. Sanctions working doesn't mean just destruction of the Iraqi economy. It means getting Saddam Hussein out of Kuwait.
The Democrats in Congress convened.
We had one session that was devoted entirely to the crisis in the Gulf. And I have to tell you that I have never been so politically stunned in my life as I was by that session, because I was literally the only one of those present who argued that we had vital interests at stake, that the sanctions were not likely to do the job, and that we had to be prepared to use force if necessary to achieve our objectives. I came away feeling that the president was skating on exceedingly thin political ice.
If I haven't done as clear a job as I might on explaining this, then I got to do better in that regard, because I know in my heart of hearts that what we are doing is right.
There were many times and many moments where you could see the political support slipping away. You could see people beginning to question the president. He had terrible problems with the Congress, and this was not as easy as people being Monday morning quarterbacks think that it was.
When we return to the Gulf crisis, the road to war, the Security Council votes to authorize the use of force against Saddam Hussein.
Best of the BBC, Sundays at 8 Eastern, only on the Discovery Channel.
All right, how many this time? 8 cavities! 14 cavities? I didn't think I had that many teeth. You're gonna have to drill? My parents will be very upset.
Parents today hope their kids won't have to go through what they went through. Luckily, today's kids use the toothpaste more dentists recommend, Crest. Crest fluoride formula strengthens tooth enamel, helping to protect against cavities.
Another great checkup. Yes! Woo, woo, woo. Later, dude.
Crest, the dentist choice, is the easy choice.
It's been fun.
We went to an authentic German baker to bring you the best strudel.
Guten Morgen.
Presenting Pillsbury Toaster Strudel breakfast pastry.
Fun den Freezer.
Delicate strudel, bursting with juicy fruit flavors. You just warm.
Und Eisen on den Toppen.
16 layers of flaky, delicate pastry that's so delicious.
Ich sag lieber, I mean, nothing says lovin' like my toaster strudel.
Come on. Hey, what do you want in a beer? Come on. Do you want a great beer that's less filling? Well, come on. Then let me show you everything you want a beer to be.
Cold Miller Lite, it's it, and that's that. Come on. Come on, let me show you where it's at. Come on. Come on.
to chit-chat. Miller Lite, it's it. Everything you want a beer to be. And that's that. Come on!
Ever wonder why your face hurts after you shave? It's simple. When you shave, you lose face, because you strip away the moisture that's there to protect it, and that hurts. But now you can start saving face with new conditioning hydrogel from Allspice. Used every day, it adds moisture and keeps it there to help defend against the assault of shaving, so your face feels and stays that way. So why lose face? Start saving face with Allspice Conditioning Hydrogel.
Armed and armored, they came in all shapes and sizes. But they all had one purpose in common: to bring the war to the enemy as rapidly as possible and hit them hard. The Great Fighting Machines of World War II, Friday at 10 Eastern, only on the Discovery Channel.
Did you know that now even the smallest business can afford its own 800 number? Because AT&T has just invented an 800 service so affordable that for only $6 a month plus the cost of the calls you receive, you can have your own AT&T 800 number. And with AT&T's new 800 service, you can receive calls from any state you choose, and in most cases, your home state too. So you can serve your customers better and get new ones. So call 1-800-225-1223 now. AT&T 800 service works over your existing phone line. And if you sign up now, you'll receive up to 60 minutes of 800 calls free. Can your business afford to have an 800 number? For only $6 a month, can your business afford not to? AT&T's new 800 service. $6 a month, up to 60 minutes of 800 calls free. Call now. 1-800-225-1223. AT&T, the right choice.
We now continue with Episode 2 of The Gulf Crisis, The Road to War. Unable to count on the support of Congress, the administration turned to the United Nations.
When we began discussions about going to the Security Council for a resolution authorizing the use of force, it was quite clear that that would give us such a boost in terms of international public opinion, but also domestic public opinion and public opinion with the Congress, because it would put us, frankly, in the position of being able to say to a congressman who would not vote for this, you mean you're not willing to support the president, but the Prime Minister of Ethiopia will support the president? I mean, so it really was important if we felt we could get it. It was decided that I would visit with each and every government on the Security Council, the most important being the Soviet Union, because we felt that if we could get the Soviet Union to agree to the use of force, China would not veto.
When he got in there and he sat down with Shevardnadze to begin the day, Shevardnadze said, "Have you really thought about what it means to use force? Have you asked all the right questions?" And the implication was, look, I have my own memories of what our military told us about Afghanistan. And are you confident that you can use force and be successful? Because he said, if you go down this path, and we're going to go down it with you, or at least I'm going to suggest that we go down it with you, the critical factor here is that you must succeed. You must use force, and it must be decisive, and it must be unmistakable what the outcome is. So are you confident that you can do that?
He was asking questions about how long did we think it would take, what did we think would be required, and so we had General Howie Graves, who traveled then frequently with me, and was on my delegation during this trip. We had him actually come in and give Shevardnadze a rather detailed briefing of our military plans, something that probably was unprecedented to have again. The United States briefing the Soviet Union in detail on its possibly prospective military operations.
And then Shevardnadze went and called Gorbachev, and he told us he was going to go out and see Gorbachev before we went out and saw him. And we then traveled out to Gorbachev's dacha outside of Moscow.
Well, I remember that when we began the meeting, I remember President Gorbachev saying, well, the first thing we must do is to stick together.
If we let a thug like this get away with what he's done, then there'll be no hope for the kind of new international reality that we would like to see.
He said, we will have difficulty with this, the idea that you're going to go in there, because after all, the force that's going to be used is American forces, and you're asking the Soviet Union to vote to approve the use of American force against a longtime ally of the Soviet Union. I mean, to sell this to their military and to their public after 40 years of looking at the United States as evil incarnate was not the easiest thing in the world.
Gorbachev suggested that, well, maybe what would be useful would be two resolutions. One resolution that would authorize the use of force, but a second resolution later on that would allow you to implement that resolution.
To do two resolutions, the way Gorbachev initially suggested, would mean that we would have to take this very difficult issue of the use of force twice to the Security Council, and we thought that would be an almost impossible burden to overcome.
And the Secretary said, with something of this sort, it's important that we do it at the same time. We can build in a time period. We can have one resolution and say it doesn't actually become operative until a certain date.
But what concerned me mostly is that the date that was agreed upon was 15th of January, and there we were at the end of November. That tantamounts to telling a burglar who's coming to your home, well, you stay in my home, loot, kill, torture, rape, do whatever you want. I will not dial 911 until 6 weeks from now.
Setting a pause for peace period in there until January 15, giving Saddam Hussein that much time, was something that the Soviets and some others really insisted upon if they were going to vote for the resolution to use force.
I think when we left there, we felt fairly confident that we had them on board. We didn't have a firm commitment. Certainly the indications from Shevardnadze and Gorbachev's body language was such that they were clearly very strongly inclined to do this.
The administration set off in search of support. President Bush spent Thanksgiving in Saudi Arabia eating turkey with the troops.
People at home say, we don't want any more Vietnam. That's right, there won't be any. If anybody's asked to fight, they're going to fight and win.
There would be no turkey dinner for Secretary Baker.
Thanksgiving Day, Secretary Baker and a few of us went to Yemen, Sana'a, and spent Thanksgiving Day. I'm not sure that President Saleh knew it was Thanksgiving for us, negotiating with him and having a meal with him, trying to get the Yemeni vote in the Security Council for the critical resolution on the use of force. As we left, President Saleh said Yemen was undecided on its position, and one Yemeni official remarked as we walked out, well, everything has its price.
1 week later, the Security Council met to vote on a resolution authorizing the use of force against Iraq.
Those who have breached the peace should know that all necessary means will indeed inexorably be used against them.
And a few minutes before the session convened, the Yemeni ambassador told me that his instruction was to vote against the resolution. And I told Secretary Baker that, and then went back to the Yemeni ambassador and told him to tell Sana'a that that would be a grievous mistake and possibly also very costly, since we then had an aid program for Yemen and a number of our friends also did.
The war option would deprive humanity of an historic opportunity to
The concluding line in the permanent representative from Yemen's speech was something to the effect, we should give peace a chance. And I'm sure the Iraqis and others were clapping in the balcony there watching the proceedings. And I did say that I thought that that might be the most expensive applause that he would receive. And it has been somewhat expensive.
Yemen and Cuba voted against the resolution. The next day, all U.S. aid to Yemen was canceled. Committees lobbying abroad had paid off.
This meeting is adjourned. We were now faced with a lot of questions from the American people, from congressional leaders and others. And it was very very important the President felt that we be able to show that we had left no stone unturned for peace, that we were not just willy-nilly going off to war without being willing to make a major effort.
He was pretty clear in his own mind what was going to have to be done, and that is the use of force, unless Saddam Hussein simply caved, and he did not think that would be the case. But he said, I want to make sure that I've left no stone unturned, and I don't want people to be able to say, well, if you had only done this. The President said, therefore, I want to offer direct talks.
To go the extra mile for peace, I will issue an invitation to Foreign Minister Tariq Aziz to come to Washington at a mutually convenient time during the latter part of the week of December 10th to meet with me. In addition, I'm asking Secretary Jim Baker to go to Baghdad to see Saddam Hussein.
It surprised me, it surprised many that this decision was made, because the Iraqis, I think, listening to the debates that were taking place in the United States, the hearing in Congress, the experts, all those television programs, I think they were convinced that the U.S. did not have the guts to go to war or to fight for Kuwait.
Anything that you did to generate support domestically was inclined to make your international coalition nervous, such as talking to the Iraqis before you go to war. Anything you did with the international, to beef up the international coalition, such as going to war without talking, made your domestic constituency nervous. And we had to maintain the support of both.
All you can do is manage it, you can deal with it, you can try to be sensitive to it. But there's no way, it's like, you know, the word dilemma is overused. Well, this is a place where the word dilemma fits. You can't solve it. You just got to constantly massage it and try to manage it.
We offered 15 separate dates, including Christmas Day and New Year's Day, in which we would be willing to go to Baghdad to fulfill the President's proposal. When the Iraqis did not pick up on that, I think around the 3rd of January, the President said, okay, that offer is no longer on the table. But again, in the spirit of making sure everybody understands we are willing to leave no stone unturned, I'm willing to have Secretary Baker go meet with Foreign Minister Tariq Aziz in Geneva. They picked up on that.
On January 6th, the President came back from his weekend at Camp David to dine with the War Cabinet and finally decide whether to seek approval from Congress to use force.
It had been discussed in the deputies' meetings, it had been discussed in a number of places. This was one of a series, I will say, in this case, with the President, Secretary of Defense, I think the Vice President was there, and Colin Powell, Brent Scowcroft, and myself.
I was one that was encouraging the President to go in December to ask support for the Congress. Now, I felt the earlier the better.
The concern was that if we went to Congress and asked for a vote and they voted no, that would weaken our position. We always believed that the President had the constitutional authority to go forward and send the troops into combat and liberate Kuwait, and that we did not need an additional vote from Congress. That you had the Truman precedent, that in 1950, Harry Truman committed forces to Korea to liberate Korea after the North had attacked, that he did so under the UN Charter, which was a treaty ratified by the United States Senate, and that we had all the authority, the President had all the authority he needed to act in this case. I'm persuaded that that is a valid argument and that there was no legal requirement for us to go to Congress.
There was a good bit of back and forth on the issue. And my impression coming out of that dinner that night was very clearly that the President was leaning in the direction of going to the Congress. I think the decision was clearly we just cannot afford, again, given the history of Vietnam and all sorts of things that have preceded it, we simply cannot afford to take the risk of going into a major conflict without some expression of congressional support.
I think one of the things that made me nervous, quite honestly, is a lot of the crisis up to that point. We've been able to work it in the deputies groups or other groups, and suddenly this had been turned. It was no longer just a foreign policy or national security issue. This had become suddenly domestic politics.
Some members of Congress, quite legitimately, were a little uneasy about signing up to a proposition that, shall we say, might not be successful, or might be successful at great expense. And so there were a lot of political careers riding on this, not the least of which was the president's.
We all manned the telephones a lot. I'm not sure we changed very many votes, frankly, but there were a lot of phone calls made.
An awful lot of time spent on individual members. And either you had the president, but you also had, quite honestly, all of his chief aides and lieutenants involved with phone calls and meetings.
The arguments that I made to members of Congress were these. One, Saddam Hussein was not going to get out. Two, give the president the benefit of the doubt in a foreign policy matter. Three, don't let history record you being on the side of Saddam Hussein and against the American president. You may think that that's unfair, but that's the way history will record it. Please be on the right side. Let the president do what is right. Give him the flexibility. This is a sensitive foreign policy matter.
3 days before Congress was to vote, Secretary Baker arrived in Geneva to meet with Iraq's Foreign Minister Tariq Aziz.
I don't think anybody ever believed that Tariq was going to be able to do anything or would have any flexibility whatsoever, but it was important that we at least make the effort to try and avoid a conflict. And I think having tried that and getting stiffed almost certainly did provide some additional help in the congressional vote.
On this vote, the yeas are 52 and the nays are 47. Senate Joint Resolution 2 to authorize the use of the United States Armed Forces.
The Senate voted, giving the president the support he needed. He now had the mandate to go to war. On our third episode,
the brink comes at midnight.
Combat arrives in the Persian Gulf, spreading violence from Israel to Iraq as the Allies march toward victory. On War, the final episode of the Gulf Crisis, The Road to War. Order your collector's edition video of all 3 programs of the Gulf Crisis series on video cassette by calling 1-800-544-1803. Have your Visa or MasterCard ready. Operators are standing by.
We'll have part 3 of the Gulf Crisis, The Road to War at 11 Eastern. But first, the Allies invade Kuwait and bring the conflict to a hasty conclusion. That's next on the final episode of Wings Over the Gulf.
I've been in love with the city of New York probably since I can remember. When I was a little boy in Brooklyn, my parents would take me to Manhattan. I've always found the skyline of New York City a beautiful expression in a very dramatic way of what America is all about. I think the World Trade Center is one of the stronger, bolder symbols of American freedom, and particularly economic freedom. And I like the impact that it had on the New York City skyline. I'd photographed it myself many times. And a couple of times, this was long before I was mayor, I'd actually go out in traffic, which would be a little dangerous. Cars would go around me so that I could just get the exact shot of the World Trade Center. September 11 was supposed to be a fairly quiet day for me. was a beautiful day.
We have something that has happened here at the World Trade Center. We noticed flame and an awful lot of smoke from one of the towers of the World Trade Center. My heavens, this has just happened within...
Smoke is pouring out. This gas goes from one side of the building practically all the way to the other.
We had seen a fireball, and I can tell you it appears tower number 2, at least from our vantage point, appears to be unaffected. This appears to be entirely in tower number 1.
I was told that apparently a plane had hit the World Trade Center. And we started driving down Fifth Avenue toward the World Trade Center.
We are now looking at flames shooting out of the north side of number 1 World Trade Center, but there are at least some windows blown out and smoke.
Here's another plane just flew into...
There is an explosion. The explosion is incredible! Both buildings of the World Trade Center are definitely on fire. There is black smoke coming from both.
And then all of a sudden, I saw a big explosion of fire. And at that point, we all concluded, obviously, it was a terrorist attack. I think that was the first point at which I realized that we were into something different than any of us had ever prepared for, or any of us had ever thought we would live through. I realized I was in some kind of a horrible, awful, horrific human experience.
Copy. Have a large crowd here, babies. A lot of babies.
You don't see people jumping from the windows like this. And you can actually see bodies falling from the top floors of the World Trade Center. Horrible here. People are standing in the street in tears. People are panicking and calling their families.
A mother described to me talking to her son on the telephone when the second plane hit. And that's the last time she talked to him. Another family described to me how their loved one had let 2 elevators go because he was older and the people in the elevator were younger. And somehow my mind went back to the stories and the things you read about the Titanic, or people who allowed other people to get on boats, and they didn't get on the boat because they were older. And from that moment on, I started thinking that we'll never know all the heroes. We know our uniformed people were heroes. They went there and they died and they gave up their lives bravely trying to save the lives of other people. But what we don't know are all the individual stories of the person who gave up the elevator for another person, the person who calmed someone and got them out of the building, the person who organized their floor so that everybody could evacuate, the person who maybe in the last moments comforted people when all of them knew they were going to die.
It is flying. It's going to run.
The tower appeared to crumble and start to fall.
I don't know if it did.
Down. I didn't look anymore after that. I turned and I started to run. Everyone ran. People just took off. People ducked into doorways, and people didn't stop
to be so sick that I couldn't breathe at all. I find it really hard to talk. I still can hardly see. There's so much smoke in here. I was breathing.
This was an attack intended to destroy us because we are a country that's built on principles of freedom. And because of free will, people get a chance to distinguish themselves. This wonderful American civilization emerges, which isn't based on any ethnic group. It isn't based on any one race. It isn't based on any one religion. It's based on people believing in freedom. your mask on. I'm putting it down.
Mayor, what's the situation right now?
The situation is that 2 airplanes have attacked apparently. What? You should not go to. All right, well then let's go north then. There was white smoke racing through the streets. This was the worst, most horrendous fire. And I started thinking about the people that might be trapped. Are there people trapped? If they are trapped, can they survive? And I remember thinking, this is like being in hell. This must be what Dante would describe as hell. I think we're going to have to remember September 11 in its reality, much the same way as we have to remember other horrific events in our history. Because somehow I think it pushes the human consciousness toward finding ways to avoid this in the future. But if you censor it too much, if you try to find too many euphemisms for what happened, then I think you rob people of the ability to actually relive it and therefore motivate them to prevent it from happening in the future.
God, it was a huge explosion. Oh, man. I'm sure everybody in the city is coming. There's got to be hundreds of people dead.
Hey, Dad, it's Kim. I just wanted to let you know that I'm fine. So please do not worry. I'm afraid to call Mom. It's only 8:50 in the morning. I'll call her in about half an hour. I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
I think it just happened.
¿Estas son las Torres Gemelas, Rachel?
Let's see. How many people are dead, do you think? Hundreds. We've got to get to a radio.
Hey, Grandpa. I'll tell you what woke me up. They bombed the World Trade Center. I'm looking at it. Meek Young's videotaping it. Terrible. I heard, Grandpa, I saw it. It could have been a plane, but I think it was a bomb, a missile. This could be World War III. I don't know, Grandma. How early? Just happened 3 minutes ago.
Actually saw a plane crash into the World Trade.
Described to me the size of a 747.
I was having breakfast with an old friend. There was a primary election that was going on.
I picked up my cell phone immediately, called the mayor's security team.
So he said, Patty, this is Joe Loda. How close to the mayor are you?
I told the security guys to get close to him, that there had been an explosion at the World Trade Center.
And I was on East River Drive, noticed some smoke, and said to my driver, maybe we have a job, or do you think that's a cloud? And he said, no, that's absolutely a job.
I said, we better go down there right away. We better just head right down there and get the details on the way down.
getting closer and closer and closer to the tower, I realized it was more and more serious.
We tried to make the best assessment of the situation as far as the rooftop conditions that we had. And unfortunately, it was littered with all sorts of antennas and cables. And we told them at this time we couldn't get on the roof. We made a close approach towards the top of the building. I could actually look over, and I remember an arm and a partially obscured face peering out of the smoke. It was waving a white towel. And it was nothing we could do.
I just wanted to let you know I love you, and I'm stuck in this building in New York.
Neil, it's Brian. A plane crashed into the trade center. It's on fire in a minute, and they can't breathe.
Jill, there's a fire right there. I love you, too. I love you. I don't know if I'm going to be okay here. I love you so much.
Oh my God, an explosion now.
Oh my God!
Holy shit.
And within a minute, I got a call. And the police told me that a second plane had attacked World Trade Center 2. And at that point, we all concluded, obviously, it was a terrorist attack. The debris and the plane and parts were coming down on us, and some of my people were yelling. They said, "Get out of the way." And we had to run north on West Street to get away from the debris because the debris was falling.
Once again, ladies and gentlemen, due to a plane crashing into the World Trade Center, until further notice, because the following service changes, all W trains will operate to 36th Street only.
We got down to Barclay Street, 2 blocks away from World Trade Center 1. And we had to stop there. I jumped out of the van, and I saw the police commissioner and Deputy Mayor Joe Loader rushing toward me.
Police commissioner went right over to him and started briefing him on everything he knew. And what we knew at the time was very little.
It was an aerial attack, and I don't have an Air Force. So, you know, the first thing in my mind was, we have to close down the airspace. We have to call for air support. And, you know, is there a number to do that?
You looked up and you just saw flames coming out of the building. There was debris flying all over the place. We were concerned right away if the mayor was going to get hit with something.
So I started looking up as I was walking. I was looking up at World Trade Center 1, and all of a sudden I saw a man come out of the 100-something floor. It was clearly a human being, and I was just transfixed. I just watched him come all the way down, and then hit the ground.
Oh my God. Jesus in heaven.
Look, another man. Oh,
God Almighty.
Oh, God. Almighty, oh, God.
Come on, don't take pictures of that. What's the matter with you?
We heard things hitting the sidewalk, and I thought it was debris. And I think we all thought it was debris. And the windows on the west side of the building had already been blown out. So as I walked towards those windows, I realized it wasn't debris. These were people who were so desperate that they had jumped from whatever stories, and they were landing. And it was a constant, the shrill of the pop as they hit the ground. And think about people so desperate that they would choose that way to die, and they had to know they're going to die. There's no way of surviving it, and that image will never leave.
I was standing on the steps at City Hall. We all looked up, and I knew that Terry would have been on one of the highest floor that he could get to in that building, because that's just what his company does. And when I saw the building come down, I knew that he had no chance. His friend Tim told me that he saw Terry going in, and Terry said to him, "We may not be seeing each other again," and kissed him on the cheek and ran up the stairs. When the building came down, I just felt a complete disconnection in my heart. It was like everything was just ripped out of my chest. I thought that Terry just incinerated. I was grabbing the dust from the ground, thinking that he was in the dust.
Come on. I got you.
already had set up 75 Barclay Street as a temporary command post when all of a sudden the building started to rumble. Somebody slammed open the door.
I tell everybody, get down, hit the deck, get down.
I think what he said was, everybody down, hit the deck.
And this gush of smoke and debris just pouring into the building we were in.
And a black smoke was coming in, you could hear glass, you could hear noise, and you had no idea what was going on the outside.
We realized that we were trapped in that building. We couldn't leave.
And I said, we got to get out of here. Mr. Mayor, we've got to get out of here.
So there was a door to the basement right there. We opened the door, and we walked down.
We went down into the basement to try to get out one of the fire exits in the basement.
Every door we went to, the doors were locked.
You know, there were some doors that went up. There were some doors that went out to other areas, and we really didn't know where we were going. I wouldn't call it fear because I didn't realize how bad it was, but thinking we could be trapped here. And all of a sudden, one of the doors opened, and there were these two maintenance men. He went directly to the door that he wanted to take us to. It was quite a long walk, but he got us to the door that we wanted to get to. He just pushed the door open and just opened. And I remember feeling a sense of relief when it opened. It meant we weren't going to be trapped anymore. Walking through the exit door, which lets you out into the main entrance of 100 Church Street, which is quite a big office entrance. And when I got out, I looked outside, and I wasn't sure we weren't better off being trapped.
Put your mask on. Come with us. Come with us. Well, let's talk a little later, okay? Okay. Yeah, man. So I'm right underneath the damn thing, all right? Yeah, here's one of the guys who can tell you I'm okay, all right? Open the door. Get out of here. Out. Everybody else. Let's go. You was just in the building, right?
Some people should remain calm. They should remain where they are, except if they are in southern Manhattan. If you're below Canal Street, you should walk out southern Manhattan and walk north, as these people are doing right here.
All right, that's cool. Do you know anything? Cool. Do you know anything about
Yes. All that we know right now is that two airplanes struck the two large towers of the World Trade Center. We spoke to the White House. There also apparently was an attack on the Pentagon. We asked that the airspace around the city of New York be sealed by military aircraft. We've been informed that it has been, and we've seen military aircraft up in the air. So we're hopeful that right now things are secure. And we need all of the open space we can get to evacuate people, to get people out, and we're going to have to move now and go north. So
I need all media to cooperate and make this cool.
I can give you the sense of what's going on in the street. Almost every building. I'm in a crowd. We are running north on Broadway. The streets are scared, people frightened, crying.
The bridges, the tunnels, closed inbound and pretty much
try to get out of that area to let the emergency crews do what they need to do. This entire area has been cordoned off. The people that have been working in nearby buildings.
People on their cell phones trying to find out what's going on. People calling loved ones.
They are letting you get onto the bridge, and from what it looks like, come in over
It is absolutely amazing to see just the sheer panic in the streets right now. Many people are running.
A lot of people are walking over the Crawford Bridge. They've not shut the
very, very, very trying experience to watch, seeing your friends and neighbors, and then wondering who might be in that building.
We want the attention of all New York City firefighters within the sound of our voices. A total recall is in effect. All firefighters and officers should report to duty. You are needed. All firefighters in New York City should report to duty. You are needed today.
Why are they calling us out of here?
Because the main crucial tower is leaning. The north tower is leaning.
Remain where you are. You
shouldn't panic. You shouldn't worry. We're doing the best that we can to evacuate southern Manhattan below Canal Street.
Oh my God, there it goes! Shit! One more! Come on, one more! Come on! Come on, let's go!
You should walk north.
Oh my God! The trade center is collapsed!
Apparently, the entire New York City subway system has been shut down now, so we have a lockdown above ground, as you said, and below ground as well. Lincoln Holland tunnels, George Washington Bridge are all closed. The Tappan Zee Bridge is open at this time. East River Bridge then
They want to go in, and they don't want to turn around. They just, people are just in awe. They can't go to work anyway. What's the difference? It's horrible. It's horrible.
And then the building just disappears in the smoke. It is an incredible sight.
Oh my God, Jimmy Beaslin's wife. She works in the World Trade Center.
Wow, there's 40,000 people.
It's really hurt.
I can see the buildings in the smoke.
You see the buildings in the smoke?
Yeah.
Yeah. A couple of buildings are missing now.
But I don't want the building in the smoke.
Somewhere else, so nobody gets hurt, right?
No.
Worst thing I could have ever imagined in my whole life. I'm sad that I'm even watching it, to be honest with you.
You are about to be on with the mayor.
Mayor Giuliani to join us by telephone. The first thing I'd like to do is take this opportunity to tell everyone to remain calm. It's a horrible, horrible situation, and all that I can tell them is that every resource that we have is attempting to rescue as many people as possible. And
A lot of people got wiped out. Sure.
Some horrendous number of lives lost. I don't think we know yet, but we have a lot of police officers, a lot of firefighters, a lot of emergency personnel that were down there. We've moved city government to the firehouse in Greenwich Village. That's where I'm operating from right now.
Conditions are unreal here. Numerous members down. Numerous requests for oxygen. Special thanks to the rig of 235 who provided shelter right after the collapse in the dust storm.
Good afternoon. Today is obviously one of the most difficult days in the history of the city and the country. The tragedy that we're all undergoing right now is something that we've had nightmares about, but probably thought wouldn't happen. My heart goes out to all of the innocent victims of this horrible and vicious acts of terrorism. And our focus now has to be on saving as many lives as possible.
Do we know the number of casualties at this point, sir?
I don't think we really want to speculate about that. The number of casualties will be more than any of us can bear ultimately. And I don't think we want to speculate on the number of casualties. The effort now has to be to save as many people as possible.
There have also been reports of large loss of life among the police and firemen who were sent there to rescue people. How accurate are those reports?
There is no question that we lost police officers and firefighters, and some that I know personally, and all of us here know personally, that we're very worried about.
Thank you, sir.
Some of the information was too brutal. I think I said that day that I don't think people could handle the full implications. And all of a sudden, it dawned on me that Beth's husband was Terry Haddon, who was the captain of Rescue 1. And I looked over and I said to her, was Terry working today? And she said, yes. And his tears came down her eyes.
She looked at me and she said, he's dead. And I got angry. I said, you don't know that, Beth. You don't know that. And she said, yeah, I know that. I felt it, and I know that.
Sometimes I just worry that he was afraid. But knowing him, I think he was completely focused on the job at hand. And sometimes it makes me angry, but I don't think that I think in the back of his mind, he was more concerned about where I was and the fact that I was far enough away from the trouble, but I don't think that he considered his not coming home. And sometimes that makes me angry. It's almost like he didn't choose me. But I can't blame him for that. He was doing his job. That's just who he was, and that's why I loved him so much. So I can't blame him for that.
And I went over to her and I just hugged her and I said, I'm very sorry. I'm just really sorry. I said, we'll do the best we can to find him. We'll see if we can find him.
I've seen dozens upon dozens of firefighters getting to the World Trade Center area.
There is still a sense of crisis. We have sirens, police vehicles racing down the middle of the street, and still a sense that this thing has not been completely contained yet.
You got to force our way into buildings and start making triage centers. So I need postal entry tools and men.
Visibility in the worst hit area is said to be zero. Even now, hours after this happened, there are scores of emergency vehicles, and all around the sirens have been wailing, reminding people that
Firefighters are pulling back for fear that a 40-story building just north of where the towers were is going to collapse, and if it does, it may hit a 6-story building that's right next to it.
And another building, building number 5, also in danger of collapse.
There is so little they can do to try to fight the fires in these buildings because the fires are so massive.
Next to the World Trade Center, both of them are involved in fire. There's fire shooting out of the windows of those two buildings. There is black smoke rising over
Building 7 in the most peril right now.
7 wall goes. Going by what it was this morning, it's this big black fucking shit. No one can breathe anything. So make sure you got a building that you're going to dive into.
Be careful, because they said when the building, if it does drop, it's going to come this direction.
Thanks. You be safe too, all right?
Okay.
Building 7 ablaze at the moment and apparently getting ready to collapse.
hearts go out to all of the people affected by this. They don't deserve this. These are innocent people. This is a horrible attack. When you think of the sneak attacks that have been perpetrated, there's no military purpose to this. This is cowardly. It was awful. It was horrible. And again, the people of the city of New York are going to demonstrate, as we have when we've been tested before, that we're stronger than these barbarians.
Anybody want to volunteer?
Okay, so Jones is our first team.
What's the job in there?
Whatever it is, to save somebody, one person saved, your life saved.
Team 13. Are you set?
I see a team 4 over here.
Just to make you aware, we have 141 EMTs.
Team 11. Where's Team 1?
What's the plan for the rest of the night?
Right now, debris removal and search for victims.
How do you feel personally when you see this?
It pales. It's just too much. I mean, all the civilians and all the members of the job, the reality is not going to come for a couple of days when we start putting all the names together.
How do you feel right now?
Vengeful, hurt, total awe. I mean, think about it. Look at this and you just say to yourself, why? There's no justification for this happening, none. What?
Get him from there.
It seems like there's no survivors.
It's nothing. Like all of the people that are waiting here, there's no rescue. There's just recovery. And it's, I don't know if they really want to do what they have to go and do there. It's just body parts. Do you know what I mean? It's just, you're just going there to like recover body parts. It's not about, there's no one alive there. You know what I mean?
No, I think there's going to be people in there. I heard someone say it. Why would they have all these people organized if there weren't anybody in there? There has to be. You can't give up. You just have to wait and see.
I know that there's great concern over what the numbers of people lost are. That'll be in the thousands. Firefighters and police officers. We lost the deputy chief of the fire department and the chief of the department. The chief of the fire department. The first deputy commissioner. Feehan. Deputy Commissioner Feehan. Chief Gansey. Father Judge, and Ray Downey, who I just gave a party for at Gracie Mansion for his years of service to the fire department, who led our team in the Oklahoma City bombing rescue. We've also lost him.
We've got over 300 firefighters that are missing that we can't account for. We believe that many of them are gone. We don't. We'll keep looking. We have hundreds of people over there now trying to find as many possible locations that they might be in some way in a void or whatever, and you know, still be able to breathe and still alive. But we believe that most of these people, I think, are going to be unable to pull out. It's just, it's a devastating thing. I don't know, well, the fire department will recover, but I don't know how.
Everybody should, in their own way, say a prayer and ask God for help and for assistance, and also ask God to give us the strength to overcome this, because I know we're going to need strength to overcome it. And I want the people of New York to be an example to the rest of the country and the rest of the world that terrorism can't stop us. American democracy is much stronger than vicious, cowardly terrorists, and we're going to overcome this. I was going to go home, and I said, I got to go back one more time. I just have to go. I have to go see, make sure everything's okay.
It's terrible. I mean, the damage is terrible. People are doing everything that they can to rescue as many people as possible, and this is going to be a long-term effort. So I just wanted to make sure that everything is here that could be here, and it is. So we just pray to God that we can save a few people.
He went home that night and started reading about Churchill. And one of the first things he said to me when he called me the next morning very early was, you know, I've gleaned some knowledge from this that I want to share with everybody. Because imagine what the British felt like, being hit like this constantly. Human nature is remarkable, and we all learn to deal step by step with whatever we have to deal with.
My brother. We're just waiting to find him. We know he's here somewhere, and we just don't know where to look.
This is my partner, Wesley Mercer, who works for Morgan Stanley. He was in Building 2 on the 44th floor. He's a vice president of security.
This is my brother. He's recently married. He's actually expecting his first child any day now. So his wife obviously couldn't come down to be with us, but this is my mother, his mother. And we're just hoping for any piece of information, if any of his co-workers had seen him in the building, trying to get out at any point, anything to go on at this point, because we don't know anything.
This is my mother. She was in One World Trade Center, and the last time we heard from her was about 8:39 in the morning. She called my grandfather, and they were trapped. You know, she was on the 79th floor, so everything around them had collapsed already. The hallway collapsed, the bathrooms collapsed. They had no way of getting out. Everything was on fire. And the only way that the last things that we heard from her, she left a voicemail on my sister's message saying that she was going to be okay and she was going to call us back. So we're waiting for her to call us back now.
We're looking for Betsy Martinez. She's one of our best friends.
She's one of our friends. She worked at the World Trade Center, Tower 1, and she has 2 daughters, and we haven't heard no response from her, nothing.
I was devastated. I mean, I could see my sister.
It's like searching for a needle in a haystack at this point. It really is, and I'm just praying that everything's going to be fine. He's a very strong kid, and he's a very loving person, and they didn't. So we're just hoping we'll find him.
September 11th was the worst day in the history of our city. And it'll never be the same. In the aftermath of destruction, the loss of life is almost too much to bear, and it will be for some time. We have to cry, and we have to mourn, and we have to feel terrible and awful. And on the way over here, I cried in my van because I had to go to the morgue to identify some. But the tears have to make you stronger. Every time you cry, you have to remember that we're right and they're wrong. I bring to you the condolences, the love, the support of all of the uniformed services of New York City, many of whom lost their lives trying to save your loved ones. We are bound together. We're going to remain bound together. We honor the memory of your loved ones, and I know you honor the memory of our loved ones. And together, I believe they are in heaven praying for us and giving us the strength that we're going to need, because America will prevail. Thank you, and God bless you.
We come here today to hold those who hurt so much, to help those who need so much, and to hear those who cry so much.
We have lost parents, brothers and sisters, sons and daughters, husbands and wives, beloved relatives and friends. They were innocent, and they were brutally, viciously, unjustly taken from us.
Some days I've gone to 3 funerals and 5 wakes, and each time I can feel how terrible this was, how awful it was, how you think of the large numbers, and then it resolves itself in this one person or two people or three people or 5 or 6 kids without a father, and you just begin to cry. Terry Hatton was very brave. He was brave, but not by any means reckless. And he was a commander.
Ready? 2.
He's what I'd like my son to be. A beautiful wife, baby on the way they didn't even know about. Never lived long enough to know about that.
I lost my husband, but I think that he did the best that he could, because I truly believe that when Terry got to heaven, he had so many chits in his favor that he bargained for this child, because he knew that that would be the one thing that would save me. And so I think in that respect, I still have a part of Terry that I'm going to see in May. And a lot of people didn't get that. So I think that in certain ways, I was lucky. And in other ways, obviously not.
I have lost my soulmate, the love of my life, my best friend.
اللهم يا ربنا إن كان محسنا فزد في إحسانه. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
Dear Johnny, Alex and Anna and I just want you to know that we love you. I shall miss so many things. Most importantly, having you by my side.
How do we figure out our way through this? How do we figure out how to give people the opportunity to let out the grief they feel and the mourning that they need, and then at the same time organize themselves so that they move on with their lives? What's the right way to do that? And there isn't a right way to do it. You just try.